threat that is not human. And I think that drives so much of the agenda of the false information, the concocted cases, the stagecraft. Now, have there been people who have been horrible victims of this? Yes. And, you know, a lot of people, when they've heard me say this, say, well, you're not very sympathetic to people who've been injured or abducted. I said, no, I'm very sympathetic. Where I differ is the conclusion of who's doing it and what's behind it. There was a physicist who used to work out at Pine Gap, the facility near Alice Springs in the center of the continent of Australia, and brilliant man, and he was talking to me about how they had been manufacturing for years these creatures that look like aliens, but they're actually man-made kind of bio-nanotechnology creatures that have been used in abductions and have really been very persuasive for a lot of people thinking that they had an encounter with an alien when it was actually something that people were making that was some excellent stagecraft. And I say excellent in the sense of very well done, but diabolical and absolutely evil. And so I think that, you know, until you get do a really good research on this and begin to drill down that, you know, since the 80s there have been people who have concluded that, you know, it's not just MK Ultra at the CIA that was doing experiments on people. There are all kinds of experiments that have been done with some technologies that most people wouldn't believe humans have. But it's because they're assuming that the technologies they know about, such as might be at MIT or Caltech or Oxford or Cambridge, that's the state of the art. It is not the state of the art. The state of the art of the technologies are unpublished in deep black projects that are in these underground facilities near Edwards and the Nellis Range, what people call Area 51, but you know, nobody in the business calls it that. And these technologies that are in the hands of the big corporate titans, such as Lockheed Martin and Northrop Grumman and SAIC and E-Systems and Raytheon and on and on and on, those technologies are highly classified and are, you know, most people, if they were to see them displayed, would say, oh, that's got to be alien. Well, it's not. It's just that they don't know how far these technologies over the last 50 years of studying not just science in general, but also recovered and downed ET craft have advanced, and they are substantial. So this substantial growth in technology that's classified and is not known by the general public would almost certainly fool anyone who would see it. I remember back in the early 90s, it was after I briefed the CIA director for Bill Clinton, I had a man pull me aside and he said, you know, we have technologies that are so good that if we want to have somebody have a conversation with their personal God, a Jesus, a Buddha, whoever, they'll have it, they will think it's real, and they will pass a lie detector test that it happened to them. He looked at me square in the eye. This guy, it was chilling. And I said, what are you talking about? At that time, I thought this has got to be nonsense. And he went through a lot of this, and I went, oh, my God. I mean, you know, and this is why, you know, research on this issue is not simple. It's like an onion you pull back, and you pull back 38 layers, and you think you've reached the core of it, and you've got 50 more to pull back. So it's not a simple issue.
Let me ask you this, Dr. Greer. You're saying that the technology is so superior right now that they can mimic an alien abduction, mimic UFO flights and anti-gravity and this. But when you're doing your summoning events and having your CE5, could this be possible again, technology that might be man-made and you might be, being deceived again?
Oh, absolutely. In fact, we've had both happen on the same week-long training event. By the way, I just want to mention to people, there are 2 spots still available for the week after the Joshua Tree event. You know, we're going to do the thing that Sunday night's open to the public. Then we're going to do a small team training for an entire week up in Joshua Tree that begins that night and goes for an entire week to the following Sunday morning. And that's limited to, I think, about 25 people. But there are 2 spots left, so if anyone has that week and wants to do it, they can go to SeriousDisclosure.com and find out. But we have had that happen. I'll give you a great example. One time we were up in you probably know where Sedona, Arizona is, and we were up in that area, and we had an amazing sighting and contact with actual ET craft and these translucent beings that were around us, very ET. The craft were seamless, this and that. And then later, we had a disc fly over, but it had 2 jet fighters escorting it that was 100% man-made. It was a man-made anti-grav that was going from the south to the north. I suspect it was headed up towards the Provo area, the Dugway Proving Grounds, which is an underground area there south of Provo. That's one of the state-of-the-art facilities now in America. Most people don't know about. They always think of Area 51. I say, yeah, that was a cool place in the 60s and 70s. But so this event, everyone there are like 30, 40 people there, looked up and they, what the hell is this? I said, well, that's one of ours. So yeah, I think people have to have enough knowledge, and I think this is one of the things that I try to train people when I do these expeditions with them is to say, look, here's the characteristics of an actual interstellar transdimensional extraterrestrial vehicle and these beings. Here's what we have that I know about that are classified projects. There are distinguishing characteristics. Now, if it's too far away and there's not enough information, you have to say, well, gee, I don't know if that was one of ours or one of theirs. And I think that, but if you don't even have that, you know, in medicine we talk about differential diagnosis, so that if somebody has chest pain, you know, there are like 115 things that can be. One of them is a heart attack. But if you don't know about the other 114 other things, you're going to miss a dissecting thoracic aneurysm, which is, of course, what killed Princess Diana. So you have got to have enough knowledge and information. What I find is sort of difficult in the UFO subculture is that people aren't drilling down at the depth that they need to, because the people studying new energy and anti-gravity and secret aircraft programs don't give much. Some of them don't even think any of it's ET. A lot of the people involved with the ET and so-called alien issue don't know about the other. You really have to put all of it together in a comprehensive bit of information, and this is what I've been trying to bring forward. It's difficult because people want simplistic answers, but it ain't simple. If it were simple, this problem would have been solved before I was born in the 50s. So I think that's why we as a people have to begin to say, this has got to be childhood zen now. We have to have a mature understanding of this issue, but not only in terms of how interstellar civilizations might appear in our time and space and how we might make contact with them, but what are the capabilities within the deep black programs at the Lockheed Skunk Works inside what's called the Cube, the big underground cube area near Edwards Air Force Base. What are the capabilities within, out at Pine Gap in Australia? What are the capabilities that are electromagnetic weapon systems or systems that could simulate an event? You have to know all of this in order to actually go out there and understand what's happening. And if you don't have that comprehensive amount of information, it's like a blind man holding on to an elephant, and you may be holding on to the back end of it. So I think it's a complicated issue. It's not insurmountable, but one can't take a facile, and it's not a trivial issue to get all this information around into a comprehensive paradigm. And that's what I didn't know 24 years ago when I started the Center for the Study of Extraterrestrial Intelligence and the Worldwide Disclosure Movement. I knew about some of this, but between 1990 and the year 1998 or so, I went through a very steep learning curve from people who were on the inside of these projects. I mean, as you know, I have an uncle who was Northrop Grumman and worked on the lunar module, the thing that put the first man on the moon. So I had a lot of contacts. When I began to learn what our capabilities were that were classified, that are 100% human, I went, oh my God, this is a really complex issue. It's not as simple as people think.
So when I know Dr. J, and we have some guests on the line that want to get some questions into you, Dr. Greer, like Johnny Webb all the way from the UK, but I wanted to get this in. The false flag event, is it on or off the table by the powers that may be? A major invasion, CNN posts it, and then there it is. Everybody knows that here's the extraterrestrial. We know we're not alone. Is this on the table, off the table, and And how are you going to know if it's not legitimate, if it's one of ours or if it's the real deal?
Well, first of all, interstellar civilizations have no need to invade here. I mean, I think, with all due respect to Zecharia Sitchin and others, no civilization needs to come here to get anything we have here. We don't need to be turned into slaves digging up gold. If you understand the technologies of interstellar travel, you can materialize any element, any material you want through resonance field frequencies, and I can get into this later if you want to talk about it. So this is not something that, there's no real reason to come here. And by the way, they estimate there are 11 billion Earth-like planets in our own galaxy, the Milky Way, which is one of billions of galaxies. So anything that's here on this planet is abundant throughout the universe. So there's no need, if you can travel from one star system in one point in space-time to another by going beyond the speed of light through these other dimensions, there's no reason that there'd be that kind of an event that would be for their own self-interest, number one. Number two, what you ask about this false flag event, what people haven't understood about what I'm talking about is that event has been going on for 50 years. In other words, since Eisenhower lost control of these covert projects in the 50s, they have been putting out disinformation that has been tailored to create within the Hollywood, science fiction, and UFO subcultures this sort of aura of fear and of alien invasion and fearing all things alien. And I think this is something that people don't understand. It's a long-term project. But Wernher von Braun, when he was talking about this, he was talking about it, in 1974. That was 40 years ago. So it isn't like this is something that's just like a singular event that's going to happen. It's an ongoing disinformation and counterintelligence project that all of us have been victims of.
Are they going to get it on a world scale, though, like CNN all at once? Is that on the table, or
Sure, that's something that I would say that's something that's possible in the future, and I think people would have to be very, very careful about how they evaluate what's going on. I mean, I wish we had been so careful about the claims about the weapons of mass destruction in Iraq before we went up and completely dissembled that country. And look what we have now, probably what's going to become the biggest terrorist and radical state in the entire world, much worse than Afghanistan. So I think that what people have to begin to do is they need to question this. And if it's on CNN or any other major network, you really need to question it. I hate to say it, because those guys are often just basically taking dictation from the right hand of the king. And I'm quoting, that what I just said, taking dictation from the right hand of the king, is what a very good friend of Mike Wallace of 60 Minutes told me up in New York back in the 90s, a guy named Schwartz. And Schwartz, this guy told me, he said, look, he says, I used to think we had a free press. He says, and he had been dealing with Mike Wallace on some of this stuff, dealing with these majestic documents and other things way back in the 80s and 90s. He says, what I found is that basically the big media cannot cover and will only portray things that they are ordered to do because they're corporatized. And those big media corporations are vertically and horizontally integrated into the system. So, I think that something certainly could be done like that. Now, the other issue is that you can have an authentic ET event, and it could be spun into something that is an invasion. For example, I'll give you a great example. Back during the darkest days of the Cold War, as you know from the Disclosure Project witnesses, many of our intercontinental ballistic missile, our nuclear missile silos and facilities were overflown by ET craft. A number of cases where, like in Minot, North Dakota, where you had 16 to 20 intercontinental ballistic missiles, thermonuclear weapons, that were rendered unlaunchable all at the same time. Now, at the same time, the same era when that was happening, I remember talking to Sam Donaldson of ABC News about this, that was going on in the Soviet Union with their nuclear weapons, but in a different way. And basically, a captain who was there in the Air Force at Minot, North Dakota, said he really felt that the ETs were saying, don't blow up this beautiful planet. But if you do launch, know this, we can intervene so you don't destroy all life on Earth because this Earth is precious. He really got that vibe. And I said, well, of course that's what they were saying. If they wanted to come in and just invade and sanitize the whole Earth of all this stuff, they could do that probably in a couple of nanoseconds. The problem is that would look like an invasion. So it's sort of a catch-22. They're waiting for us to fix this problem because if it's done from outside, number one, we're not going to learn any lessons and evolve. And number two, it will be portrayed by these special interests as an invasion when it isn't, when they're simply trying to help or prevent something disastrous. So I think we have to look at this in a much wiser way than the sort of the paranoiac and sensationalism that permeates this issue right now. And that's one of the more difficult things for people to accept, because to be thoughtful about this is really difficult, and to be reactionary is predictable but cliche.
Dr. Greer, we got a break in a couple minutes, but real quick, I wanted to give Blake any last words before he goes.
Well, certainly, we're going to be getting on location and working on our latest production. It's a feature-length film. Everybody keep an eye out for it, Hangar 52. And, yeah, Dr. Greer, I think you're going to dig what you're going to see in this film. Maybe you don't quite know the angle we're going to go at it, but definitely it's not a horror movie, but it is a thrill ride, and it's inspirational for humanity. Do you think there's good people in power that, they're looking out for the human race, and that's why everything's still together? Everything's not falling apart yet. Are they still in control?
Well, control is a very big word. I would say there are certainly good people in all walks of life who want us to make it through this challenge. And, a few months ago I was on an island out off the coast of Australia with 120 leaders from around the world. And, there were at least 10 or 20% of those people who were very enlightened, very concerned about the public. The organizers of this event, which is sort of a more elite thing like Davos or the World Economic Forum, are enormously supportive of what we're trying to do with the CE5 initiative and disclosure and bringing out these technologies for peaceful use. And these were some of the most powerful and connected people in the world. Now, with that said, there were probably half the people who were there who I thought were going to hurl me into the Coral Sea in the Great Barrier Reef and drown me before I got off that island. The hate stares were, and oh my God, I mean, it was painful actually. But I'm used to that. I mean, I'm used to being the person people love to hate. But I think that
we're going to go to break. Everybody stand by. We have Dr. Greer, the man himself. Stay tuned. Third Phase Moon. We'll be right back. Exciting interview so far with the world famous Dr. Greer, and we're going to be asking him about the Atacama alien. Because go ahead, John.
I was going to say, we're going to bring him right back. You let me know when we're bringing him right back. But we need to announce the winner of the contest. The winner, yes. Did you want to do the honors of what I sent you?
You go ahead, Dr. J.
The winner of this week's ticket, remember, all tickets valued are $5,000. We are giving them here exclusively through Third Phase of Moon and on Revolution Radio. And the winner this week is Stephen Einpar. Again, Stephen Einpar, if you are out there listening, call in or you watch for an email from Blake Cousins and of course the Contact in the Desert people. If you want to be next week's winner and every winner, we have every Thursday this month, go to contactinthedesert.com/Third Phase of the Moon. Exclusive contest. Blake,
congratulations, Stephen. And if you're out there at Contact in the Desert, Joshua Tree, the event, Dr. Greer will be there. They'll be doing the CS5, communicating with the extraterrestrials. And if you capture anything amazing, send it to Third Phase of the Moon via Skype or Facebook. We'd love to share it to the world. And we're working on this exclusive movie, Hangar 52, in regards to the UFO abduction phenomenon, world government conspiracies about covering up technology that could save the world, make energy free all around the world. Things could change. But we also wanted to get Dr. Greer on. Ring him up, Dr. J, because we wanted to ask him some incredible questions about the Atacama alien. And it's going to be incredible hour 2 coming up, because
Absolutely.
Only right here at Third Phase Moon.
I'm going to give him the chance to finish about the cabal. Dr. Greer, welcome back. We are live on Revolution Radio. And right before we went to break, you were cut off. Sorry, when the music comes on, the show is on break and over.
No
but
problem.
You were talking about, the cabal. And I wanted to ask you, finishing with what you were saying, what can we do to dethrone these people that are controlling us, and as you were explaining, the false people that are creating the false flags?
Well, I think that we have to just create another reality. In other words, if you take on a center of power like that, you're giving in and giving them more power. So if you do it directly, what you do is, while not totally ignoring them, you go forward with a positive initiative and do it notwithstanding their existence. And this is a sort of a strategic aikido that really will work. And of course, that if you look at the history of Gandhi or Martin Luther King, the civil rights movement, many things, that's basically what they did. They did not go and attack, directly in some sort of confrontational conflict, the British in India. But they came together as a people and asserted that they wanted to have this through a nonviolent and peaceful effort. Same thing with Martin Luther King. And, of course, I grew up in the South during that era and was involved with those events. And I think that, we have to learn that the way to make this happen is to come together as a people, know that there is this threat out there, and have our eyes wide open, but then go ahead and create our own community of peace, our community of contact, attempt to come together and bring these technologies out, even though there are great forces that would like us not to, and start anew our civilization. It isn't going to happen, I think. Now, it doesn't mean that, in my case, if I get invited to a meeting with a lot of people, some of whom are really, quite frankly, sociopathic leaders or people, and my view of it is that I view every person as someone who is educable. I go there without prejudice. And I've been surprised. There have been some people that I would have assumed would have been dead set against everything that we're advocating who are actually very supportive. And then vice versa, people that would appear to be very progressive and open-minded who are actually fronting for a cabal, and they just put that on as a mask. So, you really kind of have to take each individual as they really are. But I think that the real way to do it is to do what we're doing through the Global CE5 initiative, disclosure, where, when we first launched the Disclosure Project and the Worldwide Disclosure Movement 13 years ago, what was interesting about that is that almost over 800 million people around the world heard about it. It was on every network in the world. Now, the big corporate titans that are tied to the intelligence community took it down, but people learned. And now if you go all over the world, the majority of people around the world believe we're not alone in the universe and are being visited. In fact, the last year a poll came out, 43% of Americans think that we are currently being visited, but a majority of Americans think we have been visited by intelligent life. So, in a sense, we've accomplished that. The question becomes, how do you organize into some constructive effort? And that's where this whole concept of what we call citizens diplomacy, where each individual says, okay, I can become, as it were, an ambassador from planet Earth to these civilizations with an understanding of what we might have in common. And the biggest thing we have in common is that they're conscious and sentient, and so are we. So what is the nature of mind? What is the nature of consciousness? How can that be experienced in a way that becomes increasingly universal and result in not only an operating system, such as our remote viewing and vectoring system, but also an understanding that no matter how different someone might look from us, or how different their evolutionary track may have been, that at the core, the light of the spirit, the light of consciousness that is within that being is the same conscious mind that's within us. That point of, sort of ineffable unity and oneness is the foundation for an entirely new civilization on this planet that can become worthy of being an interplanetary civilization. So that's what we need to manifest and come together to create. And in the process of that, also find the courage to bring out the knowledge and the science and technology so that we get out of the 1800s. I mean, let's face it, almost everything that we're using, from electromagnetic waves to car engines to trains to whatever it is, are from the 1800s. Maybe jet engines that we use are from the 1930s, and rockets from the 1940s. So basically, for the last 70 to 100 years, our civilization, notwithstanding all the ballyhoo about Silicon Valley, has been arrested in its technological development at a very deep and profound level. And that's a problem, because then the consequence of that is that we have half the world's population living in poverty, and at the same time, we're destroying the biosphere that we all depend on, and that our children's generations beyond us are going to depend on. So I think, these are the big challenges that face us, as opposed to endless, fear-mongering and sort of ruminations about who we need to be afraid of next. I think really who we need is like, what was that? The man in the mirror. You look in the mirror. Who you need to be afraid of is right here. It's us. And I think we have to sort of overcome our own fears and sort of embrace our higher nature and our higher angels, fully aware that we're all fallible and none of us are perfect, at least of all me. But I think that we have to say, look, we can come together and do better than this. And I think that the mistake most people make is thinking that somehow this is going to be done by edict out of the White House or the United Nations or some other place, or that it's going to be something that is going to happen from the top down. All big evolutionary leaps in human history have come from the ground up, from us the people, we the people.
Absolutely, no doubt about it. Let's go all the way to the UK. Let's get Johnny Webb, our special correspondent, having his eyes and ears to the ground over there, giving Third Phase of Moon exclusive report from the United Kingdom UFO sightings, stories. Johnny Webb, any questions for Dr. Greer? Welcome to the show.
Good evening, Blake, Dr. J, and everyone else. Dr. Greer, good evening. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Hi there. I'd like to go back on a few points you spoke about in the first hour, which was our TBR-3 sightings, which was the original Belgium disclosure for their military. They were one of the first Europeans to disclose their UFO cases, and they used this Belgium, what I call a TBR-3 from the typical look of it. We see them over Scotland and Paris. There's a very famous sighting on YouTube in Paris of that. And my question to you is were you suggesting that these vehicles, these craft, are not actually alien, but they're ours? Not necessarily ours as in like the general public, but as in a secret program?
You have to take it on a case-by-case basis. So let me tell you how this works. If an event starts happening that is a certain number of people seeing an extraterrestrial object. Let's say when General de Brouwer, the Belgian Air Force, told us, and actually the Air Force loaned to us some really great night scopes when we went over there during that event to see this going on ourselves. They had NATO radar stations and F-16s that were tracking an object that was going thousands of miles per hour straight up against gravity, but they also had eyewitnesses from their gendarme of an object that was over a little town that was this massive sort of tetrahedral shape. At the bottom end of it looked triangular, but very, very low, and it actually did not move off in a linear way. It collapsed into space, into a throbbing orange-red sphere that was trans-dimensional and translucent, and then went straight out into space that way. So are there platforms, let's call them, that are man-made electromagnetogravitic, anti-gravity is the pop culture term, but it's really EMG, electromagnetogravitic, systems that could be triangular or dish-shaped, that could fool a casual observer? Well, in that sense, yes, of course. Now, what we have found is that often when there's a series of sightings or events that are ET in nature, classified programs will send in a man-made one just to confuse the picture or control the narrative. So things get piggybacked on top of each other. So everyone wants to say it was either this or it's that, but sometimes it's a mix of both, because the obfuscation is the name of the game in the intelligence community. And years ago, there was a National Security Agency director named General Odom, O-D-O-M, you can Google him, and his right-hand guy was someone I got to know who used to carry his briefcase and was all in the meetings. And he's actually the guy who looked at the Marilyn Monroe document I have from the early 60s about Marilyn Monroe, basically. It was basically her death warrant because she was going to disclose stuff that Kennedy had told her about the ET issue, but that's another story. The point I'm making is that this gentleman told me that they had something called DDT, and I said, well, yeah, that's this toxic, pesticide, whatever. And he said, no, not that. We call it, we set up a decoy. It creates a distraction from the actual events, and then we trash the whole subject through doing that. So they can do that with documents. They can do that with aircraft sighting that are man-made, that can masquerade or hide some ET activity that's going on. They can do this, and it's called a DDT operation. And when you explain this to me, and that it's that's sort of a template or a sort of a theme that goes through a number of famous UFO cases where it's this and then it becomes and it morphs to something else. And what happens is that it's not that they're not on top of these things. They certainly know if it's beginning to break out into the media. And so there could be a situation where there are genuine ET events happening, and then they'll do something that will make people think, well, this was a man-made event or an experimental aircraft. And people say, well, it wasn't that, it's this, when in reality both things had happened. Now, a great example of that, although it's a more primitive one, was the original Roswell thing, where, of course, this event happened, and then they said, well, look, here, we're going to drag up the remains of this weather balloon. The same thing happened when I was in Phoenix in 1997 during the Phoenix Lights events, one of the biggest mass witnessed events. That, by the way, was the CE-5. I had some people there, and we were doing a CE-5 vector, and I was asking the ETs to do something that would be so amazing that it would make its way into the news, and we could get footage, because I was doing a closed briefing for a whole bunch of members of Congress a couple of weeks later in April, early April. So what happened, this story kind of made a strange credulity for people to hear it, but once that was happening, of course, it was seen in a huge area by thousands of people. Even Governor Fife Simonson has eventually come clean that he ridiculed it when he had actually seen it and knew that it was amazing. But after that, they sent up aircraft. They dropped a whole bunch of flares. They had them floating down. There are flares that will do this, and you can put them out in a pattern. And they said, well, that's what people were seeing. We were just doing that a little earlier. So this kind of a program that's designed to confuse the public is done with great regularity. And I think that's why people get into these slugfests that, oh, it was this, no, it was that, and often it was both. And I think there has to be sort of a deepening of awareness of how often that has happened in cases that are getting out of the control. As one guy who was tied into these majestic programs said to me back in the early 90s, he said, look, it's hidden in plain sight. But as soon as it starts coming out like that, we just have to do a lot of stuff to divert people's attention, and they employ this DDT strategy. And I liken this to, there's these gold nuggets of actual amazing trans-dimensional ET events, and then they'll come in, these intelligence operatives, and they'll dump a mountain of fool's gold on top of it. And unfortunately, people aren't doing enough of an assay. They're not testing, is this gold or is it fool's gold? Is it real or is it Memorex, as the old commercial used to say? So I think that's one of the tasks that we have to undertake when all these things begin to happen is to understand that there's a multiplicity of phenomenon that usually get called one thing. And we have to begin to realize that it's a little more involved in that, particularly since you're dealing with something where this is the biggest secret in the history of modern society. I mean, if you take the Wilbur Smith document, that's been an authenticated top-secret document from Canada from 1951, where it states that we're studying the modus operandi of these things that were retrieved, and that this is the biggest secret in the history of the United States, transcending the secrecy of the development of the hydrogen bomb. I'm almost quoting from this document. Now, people, when they read that, they have to think for a minute. This was a year before we detonated the first hydrogen bomb. So for the efforts attached to the subject to be more secret than the ultimate doomsday weapon, and we're talking now UFOs, that is an astonishing statement. But you have to then connect that to the fact that they were studying the modus operandi, the mechanism of action of these vehicles, and that a senior scientist at the Naval Research Labs that I've known for many years in Washington, it's the largest defense lab in the United States, told me that he was in, quote, the vault, and it is what it's called, and saw a document that in October of 1954, before I was born, they had mastered what's called gravity control. So from 1954 up to the early 60s, they began to develop various types of these aircraft. Now, some people have felt that Werner von Braun, Hermann Oberth, and others had knowledge of some of the things that Adolf Hitler was working on all the way back to World War II and the Nazi era, that his secret weapon was actually these high-voltage electromagnetic anti-gravity platforms, whereas our secret weapon was the atomic bomb. And I would not disagree with that. I think there's some good evidence that, in fact, going back to the 40s, there were experiments done with this, but that it really had not gotten perfected by the end of World War II, but that a lot of that information began to then be complemented by the studying of extraterrestrial vehicles that we had downed using electromagnetic scalar weapons back in the late 40s up to the current era, and that potentiated the research and development greatly between 1947 and 1954. So that by the mid-50s onward, there were a number of things that were seen and have been seen that are actually man-made, which the layperson could easily confuse to be an extraterrestrial vehicle. And this is why the whole history and the study of this is really necessary to be able to make any kind of decision on any given case that gets reported. And a lot of times, as I said earlier, a case will be reported. There's just simply not enough